Hello, and welcome to the 2019 CIO Virtual Event, Unleashing the Power of the Cloud. My name is Maria Antwort with Argyle Executive Forum, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. I have a few administrative details to share with you, and then I'll turn things over to our esteemed speakers. First, we'd like to thank Nutanix for their partnership with today's event. They've been a wonderful thought leadership to partner to Argyle, and we're committed to providing you with valuable content and great overall experience. So thank you again to Nutanix. We appreciate you joining us today. We welcome you to stay connected during today's event. For those of you who are active tweeters, please use the hashtag ArgyleExecForum. You can also follow us on Twitter at ArgyleExecForum, and be sure to join our LinkedIn group, CIO CISO Forum. I also wanted to take a moment to touch on our content neutrality policy, which we curated based on the feedback we received over the years from our members. Argyle is very proud and protective of this policy, as it reflects our commitment to ensure the neutrality and overall value of the content presented at our events. We work closely with our speaking faculty to ensure that you receive a set of balanced and neutral viewpoints during the session today, and we appreciate our members' support of this policy. We have one upcoming CIO Leadership Forum that may be of interest to you. Finally, and most importantly, please submit any and all questions that come up during today's event into the Q&A section of the interface. Following the panel discussion, we have set aside time for our speakers to weigh in on these questions. Without further ado, I would like to introduce EJ Bodnar, CXO Program Leader at Nutanix. We're pleased to have EJ with us to deliver opening remarks. Welcome, EJ. Over to you.
All right. Thank you, Maria. Hello, folks. This is EJ Bodnar, Global CXO Leader at Nutanix, and it is my pleasure to be with you here today. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us to talk about unleashing the power of the cloud. So a little bit of context before we get to our esteemed panelists. And let me just talk about what's happening in the industry. So there is no doubt that the cloud is forcefully altering the IT landscape and transforming the way that companies operate. There's an increasing demand to spend less time on infrastructure and more time on application services that add true business value. So there is a need to bridge the wide gap that exists between legacy infrastructure that's in place today and modern software and what that can deliver. So IT leaders are now more than ever motivated to discover how new cloud technology can increase the performance and improve the productivity. We're privileged today to be joined by some esteemed IT leaders and visionaries, and we appreciate Jim, Luke, and Kamalika joining us, and we'll hear from them shortly. And they'll share their perspective on what they're doing with the cloud to better drive their businesses. But first, let's set a little bit of context if we can. Before we dig into the aspects of what cloud is doing, let's shift to the business perspective of IT and just think for a moment, what if? And imagine these scenarios. What if business and IT could come together and find an optimal common working ground and unification point that revolves around data, both working in unison and using data as a main tool to drive accelerated business performance, increase security, and agility? And also, what if, in addition to that, business and IT could run autonomously with little to no human intervention except to define what it wants, and therefore taking away the mundane, labor-intensive, and administrative tasks that we know take up so much of us and our team's valuable time. Therefore, freeing both IT and the business to focus on finding new ways to generate opportunities, revenue streams, and create new disruptive business models. Imagine the transformational impact that this could have on your business. So, a little bit of context here, and you folks have probably seen similar stats on this. First of all, would it surprise you to know that since the year 2000, 52% of the Fortune 500 have been acquired or gone bankrupt? And only 12% of those companies that existed in 1955 exist today. So the marketplace is truly competitive and unforgiving. And even innovative startups are not spared. Within the first year, 50% of US-based ventures fail. So the odds are pretty daunting for businesses out there. However, the cloud can help in that. I think an important perspective, as many in our audience are CIOs and IT leaders, it's important to ask what your bosses, the CEOs, are looking for. So what CEOs are looking for is for their CIOs to help them drive growth. And it's when companies obsess over their customers, understand the market dynamics, and leverage technology to improve their products and technologies, that is when they truly drive growth. A recent Gartner study found that a CIO's #1 priority is growth, and they're looking to the CIOs to enable that. And IT is instrumental in helping organizations drive the growth they need. So let's dig into that a little bit further. To drive that growth, though, they have some challenges that they need to overcome. And current IT is hurting due to its siloed infrastructure and capabilities. So the reality today is that today's current IT infrastructure is often limiting a business's ability to grow. Traditional infrastructure is complex and hard to manage. It requires negotiating with multiple vendors and careful selection and integration of those technologies. And once deployed, it needs to be managed by specialized teams that focus on and manage each of those silos of infrastructure. And as it always does, when things go wrong, you find these teams in war rooms where they look at their individual sets of tools to troubleshoot what went wrong, often leading to finger pointing instead of collaborative and expedited problem resolution. And to further rub salt into the wound, routine upgrades are time-consuming, require immense attention to detail, and are disruptive to the business operation, which is why they're often performed during weekends. And then before you know, it's time to refresh again. In essence, it can be exhausting. So this keeps IT spending a disproportionate amount of time tending to infrastructure. And although the infrastructure is the underlying foundation, our business partners really only care about the applications and services that run on them. They don't want to know what's going on behind. They just need those applications and services. And because the infrastructure is complex and keeps us focused on the speeds and feeds, it's no wonder that according to a Nutanix survey that we did, we found that 57% of developers circumvent instead of collaborating with IT. In essence, there has to be a better way. So oftentimes that better way is what's called hyperconverged infrastructure, or HCI. Given the limitations of current legacy IT infrastructure, businesses are increasingly turning to hyperconverged infrastructure to address these IT limitations. HCI simplifies data center operations and prepares enterprises for the cloud area. Now, most HCI solutions consist of two fundamental components. One is a distributed data plane that delivers the storage, virtualization, and networking services in an optimal, highly efficient manner. And secondly, a management plane that allows for easy administration of all the resources from a single view and eliminates the need for separate management. That is why hyperconverged infrastructure is seeing such phenomenal growth in the industry and is a great solution for on-prem legacy transformation. However, you also need a public cloud. So as good as HCI is for that on-premises data center needs, companies are also increasingly turning to public cloud. We've all seen the growth numbers. And the reason is listed here on the slide. First, there's a rapid time to market. Using a public cloud provider, you're able to deploy applications in minutes, not sometimes the hours or days or weeks it'll take to do on-prem. The public cloud also offers a flexible IT consumption model. Pay for what you need, pay per use, if you will. So you get and pay for IT and the resources and the services when you need it. Oh, something into the cloud. Oh, there we go, sorry. Also, continuous innovation. When you're in a cloud environment, as new services or capabilities are introduced, you're able to integrate those and take advantage of them in your operations. And then finally, one-click simplicity. Very low or no level infrastructure management is required. So these are some of the reasons that companies are increasingly going to the public cloud. But the reality is the public cloud is not suited for all workloads. So there are things such as data gravity or legacy applications, which make it too onerous to move an application or a workload or data to the public cloud. There are oftentimes regulatory concerns or domain requirements that data can't leave a certain geographic distribution, and therefore companies keep it on-premises in their own data center. Companies often fear loss of control. Every day there's talk of security breaches, and increasingly for highly sensitive or secure applications or workloads, some companies and industries choose to remain or keep that data and applications on-premise. And then finally, there are unpredictable costs. While the public cloud is great for certain types of applications, sometimes there are sticker shock or other types of applications and workloads that do not run well in the public cloud or are not optimized. So cloud-based workloads, what's interesting is more and more applications are moving to the cloud, but we also see some moving back. A recent IDC survey found that cloud-based workloads are returning to on-premises, and 85% of respondents said they will move 50% of their cloud-based applications on-premise. And remember, the majority of applications today still do reside on-premise. So the reality is we're in a mixed or a hybrid world, where both the on-premises or data center or private cloud environment needs to coexist and work hand in hand with the public cloud. A helpful way to look at it is sort of the analogy of renting versus owning. So consider this scenario. Pretend for a moment that each of you are traveling for work or for pleasure. And on that trip, you make your way to a new city, right? Do you, when you arrive at that city, go to an auto dealer and buy a brand new car to use for the time that you're there? No. Economically, that would not be wise. It would be wasteful. So when you travel or have unpredictable travel needs, you typically rent a car or Uber or Lyft for the time that you need it. Conversely, when you're at home and you have more predictable travel needs, you likely own a car, or maybe you lease one, so you can replace it every 3 years. In essence, you're making an ownership decision based on each individual use case or workload. Likewise, businesses need to balance owning and renting their infrastructure, choosing between private or owned on-premises cloud or public or rented cloud infrastructure depending on the application workload characteristics. In some situations, renting makes sense. In some situations, owning makes sense. So it really does vary depending upon the circumstance. So analysts such as IDC have looked at this, and what they found is the following. So overall, hybrid cloud or multi-cloud is the new norm, and the future of IT is hybrid. One of the biggest challenges facing organizations, therefore, is deciding, well, where to deploy their applications or workloads. How do they make those decisions? So IDC gave the following guidelines. For highly elastic or unpredictable workloads, public cloud is preferred. And that's oftentimes where you see businesses and organizations starting up or standing up new applications and workloads. However, what they also found for highly predictable workloads with long lifespans, on-premise private cloud is preferred for cost, for optimization, for performance, for latency impact, for a number of different reasons. So most of the workloads today in the enterprise space are on-premise, and while more and more are moving to the public cloud, it will remain a hybrid cloud world going forward. Bottom line, IT organizations need both. They need the private cloud for predictable performance, low latency, sometimes regulatory compliance, greater control. However, they do need the public cloud for cloud-native applications and elastic applications or unpredictable workloads. So what is needed? To summarize, what's needed is the ability to modernize their data centers using hyperconverged infrastructure and also run applications at any scale, on-prem and in the cloud. And that is the ultimate journey goal. So what is hybrid cloud? It's software that unifies the private and public clouds and empowers IT to deliver those applications and data that power their business. Not spending the time on the mundane infrastructure and other things, but allowing them to focus on what's truly going to generate new revenue streams and differentiate their business and satisfy their stakeholders. So with that context done, Maria, I'll turn it back over to you. If you would please introduce the panelists, and they can introduce themselves as well, and then we'll get into the Q&A portion.
Thank you, EJ. As a reminder to all of our listeners, please submit any questions you have in the Q&A interface. And following the panel discussion, we have set aside time for our speakers to weigh in on these questions. We'll now kick off our panel discussion titled Unleashing the Power of the Cloud. Today's panel will also be moderated by EJ. And please, if the panelists could introduce themselves. Will we start with Jim?
Hi, my name is Jim Beinlich. I work at Penn Medicine in Philadelphia, and I am an Associate Vice President and the Chief Data Information Officer.
Thank you. And Luke?
Luke LaFontaine. I am the CIO for the Americas for the Flight Center Travel Group.
Thank you. And Kamalika?
I'm Kamalika Sandel, Deputy CIO at American University in Washington, D.C.
Okay, great. So EJ, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Maria. And welcome, Jim, Luke, and Kamalika. It's great to have you here. So let's get into the questions. So Jim, we'll start with you first on this first question. What is your cloud strategy? For example, are you cloud first? If you would elaborate, please.
So I think we're cloud first depending on the workload, and I'll give you a little bit of a background as to how we arrive there and why we do it that way. We really were pretty adverse to cloud 3 or 4 years ago because of the concerns I think most people have around data security, privacy, where exactly is it stored, really unclear. But when we decided 2 years ago to move email to the cloud, I think that really paved the way for us to be a lot more open to it because we saw the benefit of moving some of that workload and what it did to free up our staff here to work on other more high-value things we would consider high-value anyway. And as we embarked on some new strategies around data analytics and platforms there, and investigated the cloud, that seemed to be a really good fit. And as we started to move some of our analytics workloads to the cloud, really positive experience with that, and the benefits that you typically read about is what we experienced. And so now I think I would say our criteria for applications that require, as you were saying, EJ, that unpredictable capacity needs that may be temporary in nature or come up kind of out of nowhere. They're hard to plan for. And analytics kind of fits into that. I think email kind of fits into that. For us, those things there, I think we are definitely cloud first. If you look at some of our core applications, particularly since I'm in healthcare, we may not be cloud first because, as you kind of pointed out earlier, the things that are very predictable and very close to our core business, we're probably going to decide to keep those things more local. We may decide to do disaster recovery in the cloud, and so that generally seems to be the direction that we're adopting now, is depending on what the workload is. The answer to that question is cloud first. In some cases, it may be cloud as a possible option.
Excellent. Thanks, Jim. Appreciate you sharing your insight and experience. So, Luke, same question for you. What is your cloud strategy? Are you cloud first? How do you approach it, please?
Sure. So Flight Center Travel Group is a travel management company. We've got 40 different brands of travel around the world. A lot of the growth has come through organic growth, but also acquisition-based growth. So our cloud strategy relates to that to some degree. And I don't think we're cloud first per se, but we have a more specific definition. We're SaaS first, PaaS second, IaaS third, and physical fourth. We do realize and have made the journey now in different markets with different products that we provide back to our businesses to cloud. And predominantly we're in several different of the cloud providers today. We've had a couple of situations, Hurricane Sandy being one of them, where we were forced in, and others we were more planned to move into the cloud. We have found, as you referenced in your presentation, some workloads not performing as well as we would like. Some of our legacy products are more data latency sensitive and don't always work in those environments. And sometimes we've found that certain customers that we provide services to are more comfortable when we have those environments internally. We don't have the same level of regulation that Jim probably is faced with, but it does come into play from a security and compliance standpoint. So I think the majority is sitting in the cloud. And in some cases, we've moved everything in there, and we're now in a reconsideration period about how we might bring some of those services back in for various business reasons, whether it's technology-based or more just business commercial.
Excellent. Thanks. Hey, can I double click on one of the areas you talked about? You said you have multiple public cloud providers. So curious, why do you do that? Why do you separate or spread your workloads amongst multiple public cloud providers? And how do you make the determination which goes where? Why you would put a certain application workload on a certain public cloud provider? Curious as far as how you approach that, please.
Well, there's a little history there probably, and it had to do with where the cloud providers were at the time we were ready to go. If you look at our business globally in the Asia Pacific region, there was really just one vendor just 5-7 years ago, and so that was the choice. We are now faced with more opportunities. So in other markets, we've moved into other vendors. So some of it was just geographic, regional availability, and I mentioned as well. It's cloud has to do with, I believe, this PaaS and IaaS. When you look into the platform as a service, there are certain technologies that work on certain cloud providers much better than others. So I think it's one that had to do with regional, and then two is probably has to do with the workload that you're putting in there. Some are better than others, you have to be cognizant of that.
Excellent. Thank you, Luke. So Kamalika, over to you, please. What is your cloud strategy? Are you cloud first? How do you approach that decision?
So we've journeyed into adopting cloud in a similar way that Jim talked about, which is I work at American University. There's about 4 to 5 years back, there was not a lot of interest and motivation to move to cloud. So the basis for us was how do we start exploring cloud as an option and prove to our campus and stakeholders what it opens up for us. So the first application that we moved into is a consumer application. It's email, calendar, and that's kind of where we started. The beauty of that is it's opened up the possibility in a big way from a flexibility, from a financial perspective, and a ease of management, what cloud could do for us. So then we adopted similar approach to what Luke just relayed, which is SaaS first from a cloud model perspective, and then where we are unable to go with software as a service, that's where we go platform, infrastructure, and kind of dip down the layers, and finally to our physical. So if you think about it, the strategy right now is before I increase the footprint of my current data center, there has to be a really good reason and established case of understanding, explaining, and acknowledging why we need to do that, why the other models won't suffice or won't work. And sometimes there's good reasons for that. So from that journey is what we took to get to the point where cloud options need to be evaluated. Those models need to be evaluated first to say why not before we start increasing the footprint within our current data center.
Excellent.
There are some applications which I just want to add that we haven't quite taken back any application from cloud back to on-prem, but there are some applications which we've evaluated, started, and stopped midway to continue on-prem.
Yeah, so thanks, Kamalika. Can we double click on that one? What were those applications characteristics, and why did you decide not to move in the public cloud? What were the criteria that said, nope, we're going to keep these on-prem in our data center? A little insight there, please.
Yes, that's a great topic. I'll give you two use cases, and there are some more. The one is for a university, there are a few things that are bread and butter for us. It's teaching, it's research. But what brings in money is the enrollment and the students. And we're, as a university, we're 94% tuition-driven, unlike, for example, Harvard, where you see a much larger share of endowment. Not American University. We're 94% tuition-driven, about half and half. It's undergraduate half and a little over half, I would say. And the other half is graduate courses. So the main function for us is this huge focus on enrollment, specifically undergraduate enrollment. So think about that from like a unique competency or a unique differentiator from a revenue perspective, what the university needs to pay attention to. When we try to use a CRM SaaS application in the cloud for our undergraduate enrollment, about a third of the way through the project, we realized that this loss of control from a business functionality standpoint of what you could do in the cloud and what you couldn't with a SaaS application, then the level of configurability versus what we needed, there was just a mismatch. There was a significant amount of mismatch. Now, I could bring in add-ons and third parties to create the whole for my business group, but when we computed the complexity of the architecture, including the add-on and the level, the cost, it didn't make sense for us to go to cloud. It was far better for us to manage that workload directly within the on-premise data center. So that's one use case where we kind of pulled back and changed directions. I have a few other, but I would say eventually it's the level of control we needed and what we needed to pay in order to architect that in the cloud. It worked out better on-prem.
Excellent. Thank you, Kamalika. Great insight. Very valuable. So let's move on to the next question. Luke, we'll start with you, please. So you talked about, obviously, the decision, how you move or why you move a certain application to the cloud or not, workloads. Can you share some specific benefits when you've moved workloads or applications? Is it cost savings? Is it operations? Can you reveal some of the granular benefits you've seen by doing that, please?
Sure. We will probably do between 3 and 4, just within this region, 3 and 4 acquisitions a year. And we had a, what shall I say, a varied success ratio in the past. And what we did is, in moving our kind of core infrastructure into the cloud, into a combination of SaaS, PaaS, and IaaS, we found that we now have a template or a model, and it really accelerates the entire process. So once the acquisition's made, some of these companies are relatively small or mid-size, we're able to move them from effectively being an external company right into our core systems almost immediately, a very short period of time. We just completed one over the weekend, and again, the speed at which we're able to move, because there is no physical environment, once we've got that network connectivity, we're really done and we're moving forward quickly. So that's probably one good example. There's plenty of others, and I just Kamalika mentioned cost. I think you've got to factor that in. The one challenge I offer to some of the cloud providers is that concept that you just use what you need, and there's a high commercial hey, we're going to save money kind of benefit, doesn't always work, and you've really got to assess each workload, each application, the performance, and the total commercial cost of making the shift. In some cases, we've found it's probably costing us more than it would have to keep it internally, and I think that's probably a great learning.
Excellent. Thank you, Luke. So, Jim, same question to you, please. Some of the specific benefits you've seen by moving workloads to the public cloud.
So I'll highlight two, and these are fairly recent. As we've been moving our analytics platforms to cloud, one of the things that I think we learned pretty quickly was we were able to really cut down turnaround time and development time for analytics products. I would say things that would normally have taken us months to put together, my teams were able to do that in weeks. And that was with a little bit of outside help and guidance, but it's still at a point where my team, I wouldn't consider them experts in moving workloads to the cloud. And so my expectation is we'll be able to really drive down that turnaround time even further. What seems to be behind that is the fact that by using the native tools that are available in cloud, the way I like to explain this to people, it's like putting together a Lego set. We don't have to build the pieces. We just have to snap them together. And that's essentially what cloud has enabled my staff to do, is instead of having to build every piece from the ground up like we do with our legacy infrastructure, they can really take the pieces that are already available in the cloud and really just kind of configure them and snap them together. So that's been a really big benefit. The other obvious piece is the scalability. We took one of our on-premise applications. We were pretty much bound to about a month's worth of transactions at about 1 million records for some particular analysis, billing analysis, and we were able to scale that up with the same amount of effort from a staff perspective to 300 million records and 3 years worth of data. So we went from a month's worth of data, and we were pretty much bound to that, and scaled that up to 3 years worth of data with basically the same amount of effort.
Great, thank you. And Kamalika, same question to you, specific benefits you've seen.
Building on what Jim and Luke offered, I would say, here's one use case in similar lines, but it's research faculty and what research faculty needs. So from a university's standpoint, they are our crown jewels. We really try to get esteemed research faculty to come to campus. The research is unique, very specific, and sometimes their infrastructure needs are unique and specific. So from an enterprise point of view, to provide that, I have to, I can think of an example where a specific NSF grant, it has very unique needs. So for me to build up from an enterprise compute standpoint in my data center that specific offering, it would take me a lot of time. Now, any of you think of Microsoft or Amazon or any of these large providers, they not only do they have the compute stack, they have actually an onboarding that somebody can call and just talk about this need. They have this big division that works with faculty and IT support staff in universities to create and grant that research infrastructure within a matter of minutes. So going back to just think about that kind of snapping together. I didn't have to build any of this. Not only is the infrastructure ready, but there are individuals within these provider offices that who can actually talk using the same language to individuals at the university, which is a huge thing. I mean, some of these needs are unique enough where to stand up the infrastructure and scale at an enterprise level, not only would it not be cost beneficial, it would take tons of staff time. And we just don't have the staff to scale. So that's where cloud has really helped, is the level of ease and how much time it has cut for us to be able to get to these things and not feel like we need months and months of planning and prep time and then months and months of build time to procure and build. That's a good use case of both economics and agility that cloud has been able to provide for us.
Excellent. Thank you, Kamalika, and thank you, Pamela. We'll move on to the next question. And Kamalika, we'll start with you on this one. So you've talked about the benefits, the reasons and rationale. I imagine there's been some pain, right? Some gotchas or some learnings that you could share as you've gone through that transition. So any gotchas or pain points or learnings that you can share with the audience, please?
Absolutely. I'll share two, and have our other panelists kind of build on that. So I'll say the one is, it's kind of very simple, but we realize the level of change management to business stakeholders towards the tail end of us, and that's people kind of, or our stakeholders, losing control over how much say they had on when they wanted to upgrade an application and the specific testing cycles that they built in and the specific time considerations they built in. So for our fundraising application, when we moved that CRM to the cloud, that was a big change for our stakeholders. They were able to negotiate with us, their in-house IT individuals, all the time, and we catered to their timings. You know, we would, a very specific time on the weekend, a very specific time that, you know, was within semesters, was when we would budget. With a SaaS provider, they kind of lose that control. So there's the surprise element kicked in, and the level of change management that we had to go through, but then to include that in the planning for what they needed, when they needed, and how their next few months would unfold, because they have very unique needs too. They're going to run a comprehensive capital campaign, the largest of its times. They're facing their need in a certain way now to adapt to the cloud provider's timing. So that's one that I would say kind of caught us by surprise. I've touched on pricing before, and pricing works both ways. In one instance, there is the research infrastructure, for example, where pricing is a huge plus that we could move to the cloud. But when we looked into the total cost of ownership for our undergraduate recruitment CRM, cloud wasn't a plus. So there are definitely instances, especially with the legacy workloads, where the overall financials, unless we compute it, the one-offs hit us badly, and we need to think about the cloud value proposition and the cost modeling. Do that ahead of time before jumping into specific choices of what we do where with cloud. And the skill sets, I would say, are another big thing. Is the whole modeling of cloud architecture has the technology built into it. There are way too many choices, but the financial modeling of it is pretty important too. And then on the back end, how the existing roles change. I don't need as much backup engineering anymore because I've got a system that encapsulates engineering. That's what we want, but that's a retraining, repurposing issue on the staffing side that I had to deal with. And when you put everything together, there is a lot of this going on. So the level of planning we need to do, if we don't, that's your gotcha.
Excellent. Thank you, Kamalika. Jim, same question. Any gotchas that you've experienced and would like to share?
So I think the biggest one for us has been, on the plus side, being able to expose much more data to the organization much more broadly has been a big plus. So if you're running a lot of legacy infrastructure where, you know, reports and queries and things like that kind of run in the background, and then you're shipping information out over email through PDFs or some other report distribution network, you're usually kind of bound by how much you can be sending across the network in that delivery method. But when you have the ability to put this stuff in the cloud and make it available through an online portal, you really don't have those kind of boundaries anymore. And so the thing we're struggling with now is we have some data products that in the past may have been available to upwards of 100 people who were kind of the folks closest to needing to know, and I'm sure everybody else has that in their organization as well too. And we could make that data available to thousands of users with a couple of mouse clicks. It really isn't that hard because everything's kind of connected and easy to access. I don't have to run around to PCs and install special client software and licenses. And so that's great, but it does beg the question of, okay, how widely do we want to make data available, and how do we deal with making so much data available? Because there are requirements now around training and orientation and teaching people what to use with that information. And so that's not a technical challenge. It's an operational one that if anyone were to ask me what are one of the things I need to be careful about, it would be that one. It's great to be able to make this stuff more available, but you have to be prepared operationally to deal with that. And I think a lot of organizations would probably admit that's something that they're struggling with.
Yeah. Thank you, Jim. Luke, same question to you, please. I'm the gotcha.
Yeah. Well, we've covered a couple of them. I mean, I think cost has got to be one of them. You've got to you've really got to actively manage, and it depends where you are in your depreciation schedule in some of these situations. And I think the other is certainly security. There are days I miss the good old on-prem locked networks, and you were just focused on the who could get in and out through a certain couple of points through your firewalls, and that's all changed now. Everything is much more porous. So that's a big challenge too around security and the ability to create a control environment that ensures that you've got security still in this more porous environment. The other area that might not have been mentioned, or the couple of areas, one is certainly around your ability to control the environment. So that's one area that we found. You move things out to a cloud provider. There is a great deal of limitation in how you can control the environment variables. So that's something to be aware of. Some of our SaaS providers, they've got a patch management release schedule, and you are beholden to that schedule. And if you say, hey, listen, this weekend we've got something else going on that's going to conflict, you sometimes don't have the ability to not have them run their change at the same time. So you've got to just be aware of that. You're kind of buying into these platforms, and you're giving up some of that ability as well. And then the other point is one I just talk a lot about, which is culture. And just the methodology. There's a certain amount of change management for your own technology organization to think differently. When workloads and products and applications are moved to the cloud, there is a cultural change. People need to develop new skills, new capabilities. It is very much a new way of working. You need new tool sets. But you've got to bring the people along with you. You've got to make sure that they understand, obviously, and have the capabilities, but it's more than that. It's really understand how to work in that environment. And it's a change that I know some folks here have struggled with. Their ability to go down the hall and kick it, restart it, or whatever is no longer available to them. But it's deeper than that. It's the thinking that you need to have to manage workloads in that cloud environment. Those are probably the few that I can think of. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, panel. So, Maria, if we have time for a few more questions, I'll continue unless you tell me that we need to wrap. But, Kamalika, I'd like to ask you this question. HyperConverged Infrastructure, we talked about it. Organizations and businesses are using it to transform and update their legacy infrastructure environments to deliver the applications and services they need to do on-prem. Can you talk about your experience with HyperConverged Infrastructure, why you utilize it, and how it's worked for you, please?
Absolutely. I think you touched on it in your presentation, something about, you talked about how time-consuming and complex problem solving is. So every one of us on this call today, we can remember several incidents where you get that call that something's not working. And a lot of things, therefore, are down. And what do? We gather a SWAT team. We make sure the members of the SWAT team are identified ahead of time, someone from every operations layer, someone from security, someone from app. They all come together and they go through a very complex problem identification process that is very similar to peeling layers of onion to say, let's isolate that layer. Oh, nope, that's not the problem. Let's go to the next layer. That's not the problem. So we get to we get to the root cause eventually with these complex problems by eliminating multiple other layers. This works, but it takes a tremendous amount of time, because every layer of that operating infrastructure is different. Every layer has a different specialist who understands that. Storage has someone, server has someone, network has someone, and that's the life that I have led for many years in my IT role. And what led us to hyper-converged infrastructure is the promise of simplicity in managing these complex architectures where there would be a single management pane. The specialists will need to understand how it comes together and how it works. And this is where, nothing's a silver bullet. Luke, you talked about the shifting of the skill set. And although I may not need as many fine layered specializations anymore, I now need someone who understands the hyperconvergent infrastructure. So that point aside, it creates, the promise is simplicity in management of the infrastructure and simplicity in problem solving, and therefore keep extending it, simplicity in procuring of these very specialized infrastructure if we can get all of this to work. And hopefully, I haven't been able to prove this out yet, hopefully there is a promise of financial savings too. So we have, we're piloting with hyperconvergence right now, and those are all the reasons that we're getting into it. And so if I were to summarize in one sentence, I would say it's the promise of simplifying these multiple layers of specializations into fewer layers that then makes the architecture simpler to manage, simpler to problem solve, and simpler to procure over time.
Excellent. Thank you, Kamalika. Okay, I think I have one more question for the panel, and then we'd encourage the audience to submit your questions, and we'd love to hear from you as well. So, Jim, we'll start with you on this one. How are you able to manage a hybrid cloud environment? Do you move data back and forth between the two? How do you approach that, and how is that working for you?
So that's actually one of the things we're struggling with a little bit right now is we've done some initial testing and validation of bursting up to the cloud, and it's the movement of data and where data is going to reside that is probably not as much of a technical issue. I mean, there's certainly implications to cost, and it really has more to do with data governance. And the technology enables you to do some pretty interesting things with data because at some point it starts to not really matter where it is, and it becomes more of a question of data management. So I think that's one of the big positives of a hybrid cloud environment is you really don't have to make decisions that are purely driven by what the technology can do or what it can't do. But now you have to make some decisions from a governance perspective about where you're comfortable having your data or not. The other thing that we definitely have seen so far is it's reduced our need to have multiple copies of data. And so with legacy infrastructure, it's not an uncommon situation to run into where you may need to have multiple copies of data in different places because either the workloads are different or you just can't traverse the networks and you need to get data to different operational areas or units. Now, one of the things that we've been really excited about is the ability to put the data in the cloud and not have to have multiple copies of that data because it's a lot easier to enable access to that data within your networks and across kind of divisional lines than it has been with traditional legacy infrastructure.
Excellent. Thank you, Jim. So, Luke, your perspective, please.
Yeah, I think that the challenges are always data, and depending on probably your size and what you're moving and where you're moving it. We've been using a few solutions around backup. So taking that first step, rather than having the legacy backup, the tapes and offsite and everything else, is running those backups from an on-prem to offsite. And in the production workloads, I think finding when we are making the move, we have a couple of situations, very specifically legacy products. We did try to make that move into the cloud with them, tested, just didn't perform as required due to various control environment variable limitations and also network sensitivity. So I had to bring those back in. At a point in time, we will be able to migrate those to a totally new platform and move those in. So we've had to keep them inside, but we've been able to perform some of the data backups and make that data, what shall I say, more available for our BI teams. So it all does start to tie together, and it is, again, I think there's no silver bullet. I like the analogy because there is a great deal of complexity, especially when you're dealing with we've got organic growth and acquisition-based growth. We're pulling a lot of pieces of things together, and I think in all of that, you need to look at what fits on-site and what fits off-site, what will work in a hyper-converged infrastructure, what you need to keep in some kind of legacy environment, and then what you can push off to the cloud. Looking at commercial, security, compliance, performance, all the different facets. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, Luke. And Kamalika, your perspective, please.
So I go back to the way you, again, talked about the renting a car versus where you have predictability owning a car. I think that fundamental principle makes a lot of sense. We're always going to be hybrid. It's not going to be one size fits all because of the unique nature of every single business and the unique use cases. And you add to it what does the company already have in place? And so if for example, I worked somewhere where we didn't have a second data center, decisions regarding cloud would be different because the financial modeling will come out to be completely different in that case. So hybrid is really going to be more of the norm versus less. So I go back to the example where the undergraduate recruitment could not be moved to the cloud because of uniqueness and the total cost of ownership, and we put all the components together, is actually better fit on-prem. However, we have a unique use case where when the decision about recruitment is made at, let's say, 40, 50, 60,000 students, whoever applied, will all know, hey, your decision has been published. At that point, within a 10-minute point of time, if we said all decisions about your college application has been published or will be published at 4 p.m. on May 1st, at that point, there will be an unusual load. That load is unique to that point. No other time in the entire year will that load need to be replicated. So that's a great use case of where you can have a hyperconvergent infrastructure in your on-prem data center and then use that and burst it in the cloud, because we would never need to scale things at that level except for that 15 to 30 minute window. So the more we think about it, the more, how do you, it is cloud first in some way, but it's also not in other ways, because cloud gives us the portability and this wide range of options. And then so when you look into the architecture, put in the financial modeling on top of it, hybrid and the ability to migrate workloads across is biggest benefit that cloud brings to the table, and then allows the core companies to figure out how they configure their services to best fit the needs.
Excellent. So thank you, panel. Incredible insight, very valuable perspective, and thank you for sharing it with our audience. So at this point, Maria, I'll turn it back over to you to see if there are any audience questions that our panel can speak to. So Maria.
Yes, thank you to the panelists and EJ for doing a great job moderating. We are now going to review some of the questions that were submitted by the audience during the discussion. The first question is, Are there particular cost modeling tools that you have used which are excellent across all major cloud?
And we'll just open up round robin to the panel. So Jim, Luke, Kamalika, whoever would like to speak to it, please do.
I'll jump in. This is Luke here. Sure. Yes. And I mentioned earlier that one of the reasons we initially jumped into the cloud was as a result of Hurricane Sandy here in the Northeast. It did force us in. We moved in quickly, and we probably didn't move in the most cost-optimized model available. So there are several tools out there, I won't name them, but that can help you cost-optimize and really keep track of the cost that you've got. Now, they're not necessarily, I have seen some things that will allow you to model what a cost would look like. These we're really using them for the active cost management, because we do have multiple cloud providers and we do have a growing estate. You've really got to stay on top of it. And I think I mentioned that you've got to create some new capabilities, and this is one of those capabilities we really had to build. So we invested in a tool set. We've got a couple people who are sitting there and working closely with the finance organization to pull in the costs, to identify how we optimize some of the costs. Does this need to run 24/7? What are the commitments we have? What does the sizing look like? All the variables that you'll get in cloud, and making sure we actively manage those on a pretty much a daily basis, to make sure that it doesn't get too far out of control, because I think that's a very real and valid risk. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other perspectives?
Very similar perspective. I mean, sorry, go ahead, Luke.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, Kamalika, you have the floor. Go for it.
It is essential. We have two different tools we use for cloud modeling. They're not perfect, but we absolutely had to get these tools and reconfigure skill sets so that we would make this as part of our cloud evaluation team. So we have two different tools we use for this.
Great. Any additional perspective?
So it's Jim. Real quick, we're trying to use the tools that are native to our primary cloud vendor. So our strategy is not multi-vendor cloud provider. We're really trying to settle on a primary cloud provider, and we are looking at some third-party tools as well too. But we're so early on into our investigation that we haven't really settled on any particular decisions. But it is definitely one of the areas of concern I know for management here is having the capability to do some pretty robust monitoring of cost.
Excellent. Thank you again, panel. Maria, I think we're at the top of the hour, so I'll thank the audience for joining. I'll thank the panel again for sharing, and Maria, I'll turn it back over to you, please.
I want to thank everyone for joining us today for this fantastic virtual event. Thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye.